right, here with Showtime Championship Boxing's Hall of Famer Al Bernstein. Al, what do you think of the two big fights that we're not getting in 2022? Spence Crawford and Garcia and Tank Davis. Your thoughts?
Well,
on that?
I'm still hopeful about Garcia and Davis, but I know there are issues. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because for the first 2/3 of the year, I think this was one of the best years boxing has had, and we're still going to have a lot of good fights between now and December 31st. So what happens when a big fight like that or big fights don't happen, immediately the narrative changes, and it's as if everybody forgot what preceded it for 2/3 of the year. I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna and just be a glass half full person, but the year was a good year for boxing. Those big fights not being made does remind us of the issues boxing has, and that is a big one. But I'm hopeful in both of those cases that those fights will still happen, but I don't know.
How serious are the issues in boxing right now preventing fights like that from happening compared to when you did call the Leonard fights in the 80s and beyond?
Yeah, it was different then, and
How so?
Things became more compartmentalized. And I think part of it was the network TV, ABC, NBC, and CBS had all those afternoon fights, and they would accept every promoter would be on any of those networks, and so that became a norm. There was no network issues, and the promoters didn't always, but they found a way to get past the issues because those were always going to be pay-per-views. They weren't, and they could even make them on the networks because the networks did business with everybody. So there were factors that were different back then. In the last, 15, 20 years, or maybe more than that, things have changed, and it is an issue, it always obscures good fights being made. But when promotional ties or network ties or whatever prevents a fight from being made, it just drives home to us the fact that it's a problem. It's one that boxing needs to at least partially solve because, fans, their patience is not unending.
And I wanted to ask you really quickly, this is Marcus Hayes with FightHype TV. How do these type of situations with the networks bog down and affect the fighters? Who ultimately are the ones who are paying prices with their age and their time.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's not always a network. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's I don't think Crawford-Spence has anything to do with the distribution of it. Probably Garcia and Gervonta Davis does. But it isn't always the networks. It can be, and that of course is an issue. But it is also sometimes the promoters or the fighters or whoever that just they don't want to ultimately come to an agreement. But it is multifaceted, and when you have, like you're mentioning the networks, and then there's the promoters, then there's the fighters themselves. When you have all these people in there with vested interests, sometimes it's just very hard to make a deal.
Who do you favor in those two fights if we ever do get them? Spence and Crawford.
Well,
and Tank
I might announce each of them, so I probably won't predict a winner, but I think they're both good fights, and I think I love both those fights, obviously, because so do boxing fans. So.
What do you think about Crawford's replacement fight, December 10, coming back, Omaha, Nebraska against Avanesyan?
Yeah, Avanesyan's a decent fighter. He's a good fighter, and he's a welterweight who I would like to see in with a bunch of welterweights, but he doesn't, it's not the same as Crawford taking on even a top 7 welterweight. Avanesyan, we think he's probably in the top 10 somewhere down below in the bottom of the 10 or even a little bit below that. So it would be an okay fight for anybody, but especially after coming off, not having the Spence fight, I'm sure it's somewhat of a disappointment. Now, it may end up being a good fight because again, Avanesyan isn't a bad fighter. If I was thinking of Avanesyan fighting someone, I'd love to see him fight a Ennis or a Stanionis or somebody along those lines because he would be a measuring test for those kind of guys, and it would be good. Although he would argue that why shouldn't I have a chance to fight Crawford?
Speaking of Ennis, you mentioned Jerron Ennis now. He contacted the IBF and wanted to activate his mandatory status. What do you think the chances are of him being the next opponent for
Well, it would be great. I don't know if I'm optimistic because it doesn't seem like anyone really wants to fight Jerron Ennis if they don't have to. And
risk reward's a thing.
Yeah, if there's another option. And of course, we don't know that Errol Spence, without getting the Crawford fight, whether he'll move up in weight. I mean, that's possible. And I will say this, the only way Boots Ennis is going to get a world title opportunity, in my opinion, is probably for a vacant title.
You think Jake wins by knockout tonight? Or you got to call the fight, so you can't call that. But
yeah, I probably won't say. Well, here's the thing about tonight. Jake Paul would really like to get a knockout for a couple reasons. Anderson Silva's a good boxer. He showed that. I know Julio Chavez Jr. underperformed against him, but he is a professional fighter. And what Anderson Silva showed in that fight is his ability to box. And he started out as a boxer. And would have been a very, very good boxer if that had been his path. So the thing about Jake Paul is he's a low-volume puncher. So a guy like Anderson Silva could be a problem for him if he has to go the full 8 rounds because he could peck away. He throws 49 punches around compared to like about 29 for Paul, and he throws a lot more jabs. So it could be a problem for him if he lets it go the distance. So he'd like to get a knockout.